Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today we're taking a truly deep dive into a book that's been making waves, Javier Milei's Capitalismo, socialismo y la trampa neoclásica, which translates to Capitalism, Socialism, and the Neoclassical Trap, our mission, to crack open his central arguments, see how he challenges conventional economic wisdom, and explore his passionate defense of radical libertarian ideas. It's quite the intellectual journey we're embarking on.
And what a journey it is. At its core, this book presents a powerful and often provocative argument. Milei contends that mainstream neoclassical economics, perhaps unintentionally, has actually created a theoretical framework that inadvertently supports socialist policies.
Supports them? How so?
Well, he argues that genuine capitalism, with its emphasis on individual liberty and free markets, is the only sustainable engine for both prosperity and justice. In his view, state intervention, especially under the banner of what he calls social justice, inevitably leads to poverty and stagnation. And he builds his case by weaving together a fascinating blend of historical economic data, sharp theoretical critiques, and often stark real-world examples, drawing heavily on Argentina's own tumultuous economic history.
Right. So let's unpack this. Milei, early in his career, describes a period where he felt quite comfortable focusing on long-term, purely mathematical economic models. He says this allowed him to avoid the torment of Argentina's constant short-term economic crises. He was in this theoretical, almost insulated academic space. But then something shifted.
That's exactly right. And what's truly insightful here is how he describes this period leading to a kind of personal conversion. This is where the core concept of the neoclassical trap emerges. Milei argues that many neoclassical economists, by rigidly adhering to what are called general equilibrium models, think of them as theoretical blueprints for a perfectly balanced economy, like the famous Arrow-Debreu model.
Okay.
And by assuming constant returns to scale, I mean, if you double your inputs, you precisely double your output, they inadvertently box themselves in. The powerful claim he makes is that when real-world phenomena, like increasing returns, don't perfectly fit these theoretical models, economists don't question the models.
Oh, I see.
Instead, they label these real-world occurrences as market failures, and it's these supposed failures that then become the functional justification for state intervention. For Milei, this is a slippery slope directly to socialism, a fundamental criticism of the very intellectual tools many economists use.
That's a profound point, suggesting that even seemingly benign academic pursuits can have unintended policy consequences. Wow. And this brings us to a concept he highlights using the work of Angus Madison, what he calls the hockey stick phenomenon. He illustrates how global GDP per capita remained largely flat, almost stagnant, from the year zero all the way until the 19th century. But then something truly extraordinary happened. It absolutely exploded. From the 19th century to the year 2000, global GDP per capita multiplied by an astonishing 9.4 times, while the world population only grew by about 7 times. You look at a graph, and it genuinely looks like a hockey stick blade shooting upwards.
Exactly. And what's crucial about that hockey stick and its deeper significance is that this dramatic growth directly implies increasing returns to scale.
Right, the opposite of what those models assumed.
Precisely. This fundamentally contradicts the neoclassical assumption of decreasing marginal returns in production, which posits that adding more inputs eventually yields smaller and smaller gains. Milei emphasizes that this capitalist-fueled growth lifted an incredible 95% of the global population out of extreme poverty that's living on less than $1 a day by the early 20th century, a figure that dropped to 5% pre-pandemic.
95%.
Incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
This single chart, for Milei, encapsulates the power of capitalism. It raises a fascinating question. If this system has brought such immense prosperity and poverty reduction, how can leading economic models conclude that concentrated markets, which are often a natural result of these very increasing returns, are inherently bad?
Yeah, it seems like a major disconnect.
It simply doesn't align with the empirical evidence of progress over centuries.
Okay, building on that, he then really unpacks the conventional definition of monopoly. It's not just a semantic argument for him. He argues, drawing on thinkers like Murray Rothbard and even historical figures like Lord Coke, that a monopoly is only truly harmful when it's a special privilege granted and enforced by the state. It's not about being the sole provider of a good, but about being protected from competition by government force. So how does that distinction fundamentally reshape our understanding of market power?
It's a critical distinction. He offers a compelling counter-argument. If a company becomes a market leader, what might conventionally be called a monopoly, by simply offering a better quality product at a lower price, like the cell phone example he uses.
Like maybe Apple or Samsung early on.
Potentially, yeah. In that case, the company is actually a social benefactor. This process, driven by free competition and a relentless innovation, allows consumers to pay less for essential goods and services. And when you, the consumer, pay less, you have more disposable income. This frees up resources for saving and investment across the economy, which in turn generates more growth and more employment.
So competition drives benefits, even if one company wins big for a while.
Exactly. This ties into Hayek's critique of the perfect competition model. For Milei, free entry and exit in a market are the true measures of its health and efficiency, not whether there's a single dominant player at any given moment.
Right, okay. This leads directly into his very strong critique of social justice, a phrase many of us hear quite often today. He traces its historical roots to Wilfredo Pareto and how, in his view, it became a potent tool for populists. The core idea is to gain votes by promising to redistribute wealth, essentially by taking from the wealthy to give to the poor, exploiting the natural distribution of income where the median is below the average.
His perspective is that social justice is, in fact, inherently unjust.
Unjust, why?
Because it fundamentally relies on coercion, primarily through taxes, and thus violates the principle of equality before the law. He emphasizes the idea of wealth not as a fixed pie to be divided up.
Like there's only so much to go around.
Right, but rather as a dynamic process of discovery, as described by economist Israel Kirzner. This means wealth isn't just sitting there. It's created through innovation, entrepreneurial activity, and constantly finding new ways to satisfy consumer needs. Redistributing it through force, he argues, disrupts this vital discovery process. This critique is heavily influenced by Hayek's profound essay, The Atavism of Social Justice, which views attempts at social justice as a regression to pre-market tribalistic instincts.
Wow.
It's a very challenging take on a widely accepted concept.
That's certainly a provocative way to describe something so many people view as positive. And he takes this critique of the state even further, describing it as a criminal organization, primarily funded by coercive taxation. He uses a very vivid, almost chilling analogy of 4 wolves and a chicken voting on dinner to illustrate the dangers of what he calls unlimited democracy when it comes to economic matters, where the majority can simply vote to take from the productive minority. But many would argue that the state, despite its flaws, is also essential for things like enforcing contracts, protecting property rights, or even providing public goods that markets might not deliver. How does Milei address those counter-arguments, or does he simply dismiss them?
Well, he argues that the state's legitimate functions are extremely limited, primarily justice and security, protecting those very property rights and contracts. Anything beyond that, in his view, becomes a vehicle for coercion. And we can see the consequences of excessive state intervention vividly illustrated by Argentina's own history, which he frequently references as a cautionary tale.
Right, the real-world example.
Exactly. He details the incredibly high fiscal pressure, for instance, a staggering 70% on food producers, yet paradoxically, 5 million Argentinians are food insecure.
70% tax on food.
That's what he states. Real wages, he notes, have collapsed, plummeting from an average of $1,800 to just $300. The formal private sector, he points out, has been stagnant for 12 years, creating not a single new job.
12 years. Wow.
While public employment and informal work are the only areas seeing growth. The pension system is utterly broken, and the education system is in crisis, with 50% of third graders not understanding what they read.
That's shocking.
He attributes these pervasive issues directly to persistent state intervention and the seductive allure of populism that prioritizes redistribution over production.
So what does this all mean for solutions? After painting such a bleak picture, he proposes a clear path forward, encapsulated in what he calls the Pacto de Mayo, or May Pact. It's a comprehensive 10-point agenda for state policies. It includes the inviolability of private property, an unnegotiable fiscal balance, reducing public spending to 25% of GDP, a tax reform to lower pressure and simplify life, federal co-participation reform, commitment to natural resource exploitation, a modern labor reform, sustainable pension reform, structural political reform, and international trade openness. Looking at this list, what are 1 or 2 points that truly stand out as reflective of his most radical ideas, or perhaps the most challenging to implement?
Well, the commitment to reducing public spending to 25% of GDP is incredibly ambitious for a country like Argentina, which has become accustomed to much higher levels. It implies a massive overhaul of the state.
Huge changes.
Definitely. And the inviolability of private property is foundational. It's his bedrock principle, arguing that without it, no true economic progress or stability is possible. He then ties this back to a broader historical context, specifically contrasting it with Malthus's famously pessimistic iron law of wages, which predicted population growth would lead to diminishing returns, scarcity, and subsistence wages.
The idea that more people just means more poverty.
Right. Milei, aligning with Julian Simon, argues that Malthus was profoundly mistaken. Simon's work highlights that population growth can actually drive technological progress and economic growth, as more people mean more innovators and problem solvers.
More brains, more progress.
Challenging the idea of inherent resource scarcity. The hockey stick is his empirical proof against Malthusian fears.
He also dedicates significant time to monetary theory and the role of inflation, a topic that hits very close to home for many, especially in Argentina. He explains what money is, distinguishing between M1, that's circulating currency plus demand deposits, like the money in your checking account, and M2, which includes M1 plus time deposits, like savings accounts. And he argues that its supply is exogenously determined by the central bank. So for you, the listener, when he says exogenously determined, he means the central bank is the only one pulling the strings on the money supply, not the market.
Pretty much, yes.
He then reiterates the direct link between excessive monetary emission and inflation, pointing to Argentina's recent staggering figures like 17,000% annual wholesale inflation.
Unbelievable numbers.
And the alarming 11% of GDP emitted in just 2 years.
And the costs of that kind of inflation, he explains, are far-reaching and deeply damaging. He talks about shoe leather costs, which is literally the idea that people wear out their shoes running around trying to spend money before it loses value.
But constantly trying to beat inflation.
Or going to the bank to convert cash into something stable. Then there are menu costs, businesses having to frequently change their listed prices due to rapidly rising general price levels, which can be literally a physical cost for printing new menus. But more critically, inflation leads to an arbitrary wealth redistribution. It harms those on fixed incomes like pensioners, whose savings are eaten away. It creates massive uncertainty for debtors and creditors alike.
Yeah, it throws everything off kilter.
And he emphasizes that high inflation often means variable inflation, which causes significant uncertainty and distortions to tax systems as the real value of taxes collected diminishes rapidly. It's a chaotic environment that stifles investment and long-term planning.
So we've explored Milei's views on wealth creation and the dangers of intervention at home. But what happens when we broaden our scope to the global stage? How do his principles apply to open economies and international trade? He uses the national accounting identity, which states that national savings must equal domestic investment plus net exports. This identity highlights how trade surpluses or deficits are directly related to the international flow of capital.
Right. And a key point Milei emphasizes here are the implications of perfect capital mobility for a small, open economy. Imagine money can flow freely in and out of a country with no barriers.
Okay.
In that situation, your local interest rate isn't primarily set by your own government, but by the global market. So if your government changes fiscal policy, say, through tax cuts or increased government spending, or if there are shifts in domestic investment through new tax deductions for businesses.
Which happens all the time.
These changes don't really affect your interest rates much. Instead, they impact your country's national savings, which then influences your real exchange rate and, consequently, your trade balance. For instance, if domestic investment increases, it often leads to a trade deficit because that additional investment has to be financed by borrowing from abroad. Foreign capital flows in, your domestic currency appreciates, making imports cheaper and exports more expensive. It's all interconnected.
Interesting. The book also delves into social critiques beyond just economic policies, including the widely discussed issue of the gender pay gap. He presents the argument that when data is properly disaggregated by profession, level of study, and years of experience, the glass ceiling effect, as commonly understood, largely disappears.
So he's saying the raw gap isn't the full picture.
Exactly. He suggests that observed differences are more accurately attributed to free individual choices and occupational specialization rather than systemic discrimination. It's a very specific, data-driven approach to a complex social issue.
And to underscore his broader point about social justice and the value of individual choice and contribution, he uses a very relatable analogy. Lionel Messi.
Ah, the soccer star.
Right. Messi's incredibly high earnings, he explains, are a direct result of millions of voluntary exchanges. You, the fan, choose to pay to see him play or buy his jersey, generating his immense wealth. The author argues that any attempt to redistribute Messi's wealth in the name of social justice would ultimately destroy the value and incentives for everyone involved in that entire process, from the players and coaches to the clubs and the fans.
Because it undermines the reason people strive.
Essentially, yes. By stifling the very activities that generate such widespread enjoyment and economic activity, he argues, society as a whole would become poorer. It's about protecting the incentive for value creation.
After laying out all these powerful arguments, Milei brings it all together in a very direct, almost uncompromising conclusion. What's the ultimate call to action he's leaving his readers with?
He reiterates a stark warning and a call to action. Do not allow the advancement of socialism. Do not validate excessive regulation. Do not accept the concept of market failures as a justification for intervention. And crucially, do not permit the progression of what he controversially calls the assassin agenda, a concept he links to Malthusian ideas about overpopulation, the Club of Rome's warnings of resource limits,
Okay.
and his interpretation of neo-Marxism, which he believes has shifted class struggle from purely economic issues to cultural ones like gender and environmentalism.
Yeah.
And finally, he warns against being swayed by the siren songs of social justice.
Wow. It's a very passionate and direct plea for what he considers true liberty.
Absolutely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the author leaves us with a stark choice. He argues that the trajectory of nations, like Argentina, serves as a powerful empirical lesson. Clinging to policies that undermine freedom and capitalism, no matter how well-intentioned, leads to a path of inevitable decline and poverty.
It certainly provides a lot to unpack, and even more to ponder.
That's right. He challenges you, the listener, to look at the world around you through a different lens. What does this mean for the choices you see being made in your own country in the global economy? And how might understanding these economic principles, even if controversial, change your perspective on societal well-being and growth? It really makes you think about how we often take modern prosperity for granted, doesn't it?
So what does this all mean for the ideas of economic growth and societal well-being you encounter every day? It certainly provides a lot to unpack and even more to ponder.